Hello and welcome back to Like Maria. Today we're going to look at another poem of the decade. It's going to be Tim Turnball's Ode on a Grayson Perry Urn. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this poem with you today. Please remember to hit the like button if you enjoy this. So I'm going to tackle this through an essay title. It's usual for the poems of the decade to have a compare question. I'm going to tackle it as a kind of compare question, but I'm not going to do the compare bit. So today we're going to look at the essay, compare the presentation of beauty in Ode on a Grayson Perry Urn and one other poem. So I'm going to look today at three aspects of the presentation of beauty that Turnball uses in this poem. We're going to look at beauty being celebrated by his choice of the Ode Form. We're then going to look at the beauty which is expressed in the sensual imagery and the exuberance of youth that's portrayed. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the sound of the poem and how that contributes to the overall beauty. So first of all, the Ode Form. The Ode Form is a very traditional form going back to classical times. You might know it from Keats, and in fact, you might know the poem Ode on a Grecian Urn that Keats wrote and is a very famous poem. It's a particular form that celebrates beauty, and it's often addressed to an object or a person who isn't there. In Keats's case, quite often it was a god or an artifact from the Greek and classical times. So it's really important to listen out to the voice in this poem. So he uses this traditional form, which has its roots in classical time, to celebrate the urn and to talk about the urn's significance as a piece of history, as recording what is happening around. The pictures on this urn are recording what is happening around in society in the same way that the Keats did. Now, Turnball comes quite close to the Keats in that he employs 5 10-line stanzas. So this form is a very regular form. We have here the iambic pentameter, di-dum, 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 di-dum. And even the initial words of some phrases are borrowed from Keats, like the word forever in some phrases. So Turnball sticks closely to the Keats, employs this ode form, which has a very regular rhythm, a very regular structure, and is tied down to a description of what is on this vase. So we are seeing one of Grayson Perry's vases being described by the poetry. And Turnball talks initially about this is a rather garish crock. This is rather a kitsch piece of art. But then he makes us appreciate that this urn is a reflection of the times and the people and the youth in particular that are living there. And he celebrates this by writing an ode and by just describing for us the richness and the beauty that we should be able to see in this community and this society. So the next thing I want to discuss is this voice. There is a traditional address to the voice, and the subject is addressed with that second person pronoun you and your. Particularly obvious here in the first and last stanza, where Turnball talks to the urn and presents us in the last stanza with that conviction that the urn will last. So he initiates conversation with the urn, talking about it to us and talking about its properties, its ability to describe the landscape surrounding it, and its ability to encapsulate in an art form and present society. It's a product of its society. He talks in quite a casual voice about the kitschy vase as being knocked out early on. And he talks about your gaudy evocation. Now, gaudy evocation doesn't sound great. Gaudy, kitsch, it's being knocked out. He starts off in terms that an art critic might be criticising the vase, but he soon undermines this tone. And he moves on to talk in rich vocabulary. He says, for example, that the vase does not induce fright. Rather, it can bring to mind the throaty turbo roar, the joyful throb of youthful activity. Art is seen here as being able to evoke sensual and important emotions and feelings that arise in the society of the time. He returns in the last stanza to address the clock again. He says that it will stand the test of time, even when we're long in the box. So he creates a voice here for those creatures to communicate with future generations. And that's really important. The people that have inspired the artwork now are able to communicate through the vase and present themselves as beautiful. If we're thinking back to that essay topic, they are a thing of beauty that it is recorded in the artwork. Lastly, I want to talk to you about the sounds of the poem, the rhythm and pace of this poem. We have lots of enjambment, which creates quite a swift pace early on, but sometimes there are end-stopped lines, sometimes there are caesuras, and Turnball really uses the pace to emphasise the differences between moments in his poem and the actions in the poem. I'm going to analyse a section of the poem shortly for you in detail. You'll see it on the screen and we can talk in detail about that. I've mentioned the iambic pentameter. The rhythm of everyday speech is employed here, even though it is controlled in these stanzas, which are very regular. It is beautified somehow, but essentially iambic pentameter is the rhythm of everyday speech, and it makes those characters being able to speak to us when their actions are described. There is also a beautiful lyricism here in the lexical choice and the sibilants employed. I'm going to look at that and you'll see the slide up here. So if we just concentrate on the section which starts your gaudy evocation, I'm going to read that out just so that we can focus on that. Your gaudy evocation can somehow conjure the scene without inducing fright, as would a daily express expose. Can bring to mind the throaty turbo roar of hatchbacks, tuned almost to breaking point, the joyful throb of UK garage or of house imported from the continent, and yet induce a sense of peace, of calm. So here you can see a variety of techniques being used. If you look at the sibilants, for example, induce a sense of peace. Those words have been chosen for their S sounds. They marry up there and they bring us to a pause, a caesura before of calm. They bring us to calm, and then Turnball states what we've been brought to, calm. So that wind down of that section there, the winding down of that section there brings us to this calm place. We also have this beautiful lyricism, conjure the scene, inducing, educing, joyful throb. These are very positive words that are describing something that is potentially not a very pleasant sound. But somehow here Turnball turns it in to something of beauty. And it's really saying that beauty is around us. Beauty can be nurtured and encouraged through the way we describe things and the way we see things. And if we use lyrical language, it might help us to appreciate beauty that initially we might have rejected because it seemed different from us, odd, difficult for us perhaps. And here I think is where we get this sense of a vibrant youth culture that is being celebrated by Grayson Perry in his artwork, and then taken a step further by Tim Turnball in this poetry, which at the end of the day, the poem is kind of an urn. The poem has created the urn for us, and we are able to see the poem and appreciate it as art, and therefore appreciate something of what initiated the art. So that's our discussion of beauty in Tim Turnball's Ode on a Grayson Perry Urn. Please like if you've enjoyed that, and I'm hoping that you could write that part of the essay now, just like Maria.